Welcome to the Patrick Coffin Show. Today we're going to talk about Boyhood. Who cares about Boyhood? Nobody, which is why a book had to be written about it called Defending Boyhood with Dr. Anthony Esolen. We are going to drill deep into some very important content. Even if you don't have sons, even if you're not a boy, the role of boyhood and how it's being attacked by our current cultural elites is a very important topic, and it affects everything else we say about recovering the DNA damage done to the culture. Defending Boyhood is the name of the book, and we're going to go long and deep here on the Patrick Coffin Show with its author. I want to mention we are going to Germany, and you are going to join us. If you're listening right now, you want to see Catholic Germany next year, culminating in the Oberammergau live passion play. Go to patrickcoffin.media/pilgrimage and sign up. If you're listening on the day the show drops, that would be April 30th, 2018, you save $100. So go to patrickcoffin.media/pilgrimage. Join us with Father Willie Raymond. We're going to hit, Regensburg and Oberammergau and the Dachau death camp. We're going to have Mass at the Carmelite Monastery. We're going to go to Salzburg, Austria, where The Sound of Music was filmed. It's going to be great. It's next May. Find out more at patrickcoffin.media/pilgrimage. Coming up next, Tony Esolen. Dr. Anthony Esolen joins us from his sprawling estate somewhere in New England. Hey, Tony, thanks for coming back on.
Thanks, Patrick. Great to be here.
You've written a lot of good books, and this is, of all the good books you've written, this is the most recent. Why did you write it?
Well, it's actually not the most recent, but it's almost the most recent.
Oh, you have another book after Defending Boyhood?
Nostalgia. Going Home in a Homeless World.
Oh, I thought that. Okay, well then, happy to be corrected. I thought it was the next to previous one. Anyway, you're very prolific. Another reason why I hate you. Go on, sir.
Well, the thing that passes for a culture out there gives me a lot of material to work with, right? Mm-hmm. Because you end up having to write books that never should have had to be written, and Defending Boyhood is one such book. I wrote it because nobody stands up for boys, and I figured that, well, I had better do that. If we Catholics want to establish strong families, right? Well, that's not going to happen unless boys are made into strong and confident and virtuous men. But nobody's paying attention to boys at all. In fact, they're undermining the boys' chances of becoming strong and responsible and virtuous men. Mm-hmm. So somebody has to stand up for them, so I stand up for them.
There's a number of references to films, and one of the films that you bring in as part of your thesis is the Father Flanagan Boys Town movie was starring, right. I want to say Spencer Tracy and Andy Rooney. And Father Flanagan used... Pardon me?
Mickey Rooney, yeah.
Mickey Rooney. And one of the bad kids says that he's rotten to the core. He's really, really bad. And Father Flanagan says a little prayer to, maybe God give me the grace to say the right thing. And I love this answer about having a teacher. Remember that anecdote?
Right. The boy in question doesn't want to obey any rules at all. Scorns the idea that you can even have a teacher, but Father Flanagan shows him that in fact he does have a teacher. He's just being led by the nose by the local thugs and tramps and drunks. Right? It's not a question of whether you're going to have a teacher. It's a question of which one you're going to have. Mm-hmm. Father Flanagan also believed that until the bad habits became ingrained in a young man or a man, there was no sense to the phrase a bad boy. There aren't yet any bad boys. There's no boys in which habits of vice are so deeply ingrained that you need a miracle of God to turn the person around. Father Flanagan is an amazing figure, and we don't have any like him right now. Nothing.
Yeah, I can't think of any kind of modern equivalent of Boys Town. I think it still exists, but but so many institutions devoted to helping.
Exist.
Yeah. Maybe there's
Zero.
great works being done quietly we never hear about. But the institutions that traditionally supported boyhood, like the Boy Scouts, start the list with Boy Scouts, totally deconstructed and almost irrelevant now, if not harmful.
Right, if not harmful. The Boy Scouts have forgotten what it even means to be a boy. When they allowed for homosexual scoutmasters, they implicitly denied that there was any value in helping a boy negotiate the straits of puberty and post-puberty so that he can become a man who would marry a woman and have children in a family, right? If you don't know that is the goal for boys, socially speaking, then you have no business calling yourself an organization for boys. They cut themselves out from their very definition. 100 years ago, 110 years ago, there all over the country there was something called, in fact, the Boys Movement, and it was made manifest not just in the Boy Scouts. Boy Scouts in the United States, I think, were established in 1911. Boys Life magazine, first issue in the U.S., came out in 1911. But it wasn't just them. It was a broad-based movement across all the Christian denominations. Boy Scouts was a big part of it, but it was only one part, right? The YMCA, which was established earlier in the 19th century.
Yeah, Tony, for people who don't know what the acronym YMCA stands for, many don't. What is it? Young
Men's Christian Association.
Thanks, Village people.
Okay. So the idea was, it's terrible, right? And the Village people, and people sing that song not knowing what the lyrics are all about. The lyrics are about hanging around the YMCA so that you can pick up cheap sex.
100%.
Cheap homosexual sex with young men or boys. It's almost a pedophilic song, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, the YMCA was especially aimed at young men or older teenage boys who might be away from home. That is, they've left home, they've gone out into the world, they're trying to make their way, and rather than being led into lives of vice by the local drunks or pimps or hoodlums of various sorts, and that be a temptation when you're away from home for the first time, and maybe you not have a whole lot of money in your pocket. The YMCA was there to minister to such people, such young men who are vulnerable, so that they'd have a warm roof over their heads, a decent breakfast, clean bed to sleep in, and be taught upstanding, virtuous, clean morals. Right? That's gone now. YMCA is a daycare center and spa now.
And
right? So there's nothing left.
Yoga retreat housing.
Nothing left now for boys. Boys can go hang, as far as the schools are concerned, and everybody else too, pretty much.
I was talking with the Catholic dad recently. It doesn't matter who it is, but it's a really good man with boys, and he wanted to teach them life skills. They're probably 4 to 7, and he got them into the local wrestling club. Grappling, right? If you watch mixed martial arts, right, it's not the heavyweight guys who can punch off, punch over a truck that win. It's the grapplers that bring the fight to the ground. So there's a lot of life lessons in the art and the science of wrestling. Can you guess why he had to pull them?
Yeah, I can guess, and it's cruel.
Girls.
It's disgusting.
Forcing boys to wrestle
cruel,
girls.
That's right.
Because if they win, they lose. They can't. It's lose-lose for the boys.
Right, and I blame in this particular case. I blame men. Okay, because you've got fathers who this is one of those weird problems that show up when people have only one child or two children. you have fathers with a girl or two girls, and that's it. And so the fathers who want to do the sporting things turn their girls into tomboys or try to turn them into boys. And those fathers have no sense of responsibility for other fathers' sons. Okay? It's all about their girls and nothing but their girls.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the boys are being taught something perverse here. You can't tell me that it's such a not be logically consistent, that it's such a horrible thing for a man, a grown man, to raise his hand in anger against a woman on Monday and then be having boys wrestle girls on Tuesday. Okay?
Yeah.
You're insane if you do that. You're an idiot if you do that. What the boys will have, if they do wrestle the girls, is a physical memory of being violent with somebody of the opposite sex. That's insane. Okay? That's completely insane. You're right. If they win, they lose. If they compete, they lose. If they win, they lose because they have that evil memory. If they win and it's a hard-fought win, they lose because they're embarrassed. If they lose, it's a disaster. It's just disgusting how little care we take for their feelings. And people say, well, they'll have to learn. They'll have to get used to. These are just kids. These are not grown men. These are just kids. Mm-hmm. No care for them at all. It's staggering how heartless it is.
And then there's the trans movement that is now infecting pediatrics and middle school education, the things that are taught, such as a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old can choose his gender. I mean, I'm totally turned off even by the word gender. It's just one of those mushy bumper sticker things. Good old-fashioned sex works for me, boys and girls. You see media coverage, Tony, I know you've noticed this, where the wrong pronoun is used deliberately over and over and over again, like a power lifter. This is a boy who thinks he's a girl, and he's still a power lifter. And guess what? He wins all the women's competitions. The women wrestlers will bash the brains out of a girl because it's a man who thinks he's a girl and who's had maybe anatomy lopped off and a chemical cocktail of hormones. And this is, it's just stunning to me.
Not even have the anatomy.
Yeah, right.
And one of these days, one of these girls is going to get a neck broken.
Mm-hmm.
In this, we're completely insane.
You mean the real girls?
The real girl is going to get her neck broken one of these days. A chokehold, an opposite sex chokehold. A strong young man who thinks he's a girl having a girl in a chokehold. He judges by himself, not by the opposite sex. One of these days, one of those girls is going to get hurt very bad.
God forbid. There's a song by, it's made famous by Johnny Cash, and to me, it's one of those before photos to indicate how far we've fallen, how crazy things have become, how fast. It's A Boy Named Sue by Johnny Cash. Now, normally I don't like to read, and I'm not going to do a Johnny Cash impersonation, but this is a song that you better say a little prayer for because it's going to be banned. It's completely unacceptable and offensive. Well, my daddy left home when I was 3, and he didn't leave much to Ma and me, just this old guitar and an empty bottle of booze. Now, I don't blame him because he run and hid, but the meanest thing that he ever did was before he left. He went and named me Sue. Well, he must have thought it was quite a joke, and it got a lot of laughs from lots of folk, and seems I had to fight my whole life through. Some gal would giggle, and I'd get red, and some guy'd laugh, and I'd bust his head. I tell you, life ain't easy for a boy named Sue. Well, I grew up quick, and I grew up mean. My fists got hard, and my wits got keen. Roamed from town to town to hide my shame. But I made a vow to the moon and stars. I'd search the honky-tonks and bars and kill that man who gave me that awful name. It turns to the end now. Well, I was in Gatlinburg in mid-July, and I hit town. My throat was dry, and I thought I'd stop and have myself a brew. At an old saloon in a street of mud, there sat at a table dealing stud, sat the dirty, mangy dog that named me Sue. Well, I knew the snake was my own sweet dad from a warming-up picture that my mother'd had. And I knew that scar on his cheek and his evil eye. He was big and bent and gray and old. And I looked at him and my blood ran cold. And I said, my name is Sue. How do you do? Now you're gonna die. Yeah, that's what I told him. Well, I hit him hard right between the eyes, and he went down, but to my surprise, he came up with a knife and cut off a piece of my ear. Now, this is one of the great lines in country music. I busted a chair right across his teeth, and we crashed through the wall and into the street, kicking and gouging in the mud and the blood and the beer. So, in the end, they do make up. They have this fight. I got all choked up, and I threw down my gun, called him my pa, and he called me his son. And I come away with a different point of view. And every time I think of him now and then, every time I try, and every time I win, and if I ever have a son, I think I'm going to name him Bill or George or anything but Sue. I still hate that name. Now, that song's offensive to you. It's not cute. It's not funny. Oh, by the way,
of course the song is.
Yeah. Do you know who wrote it?
The song gets at something that everybody knows, right? Everybody in every single culture. I've said this all the time, right? Every culture that you can name. Doesn't matter the race, doesn't matter the continent, the climate, the religion, the technological level, the cultures. None of that matters. In all cultures, everybody knows that the boys need to establish their separate identities as men, as male, apart from their mothers and their sisters. That they have to go away from that in order to gain that identity, so that they can then become fathers of families in turn, right?
Yeah.
So when you associate the boy in this intimate way with the girls, right, you cause that boy trouble, and the song. Evidently, the song is about the boy who has to fight through that, and is made all the stronger because he's got to fight.
That's right.
Right. You can give a girl a boy's name, and the girl won't suffer from it. You can have the girl be a tomboy. Tomboys are generally liked. Sissies are not.
No, that's right.
Boys like girls who are tomboys, but girls do not like boys who are sissies. And they don't marry them in any case, right?
Yeah.
So you can have the girl do the boy thing, and everybody looks at it and they say, "Oh, that's fun. That's the boyish girl. But a girlish boy, not so."
Yeah.
As soon as the thing, whatever it is, becomes associated with girls, the boys either lose interest in it, or they shy away from it because they need to establish their separate identities, right? Everybody knows this. Everybody knows it. Except for us. Well, maybe we do know it, but we deny it.
The writer of that song also wrote another book about boyhood called The Giving Tree. The Boy Named Sue was written by Shel Silverstein.
No kidding.
Yeah, fun
of all
fact.
People.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, First Things did a whole...
The Giving Tree is the liberals' favorite child book.
Yeah, I think The Giving Tree teaches narcissism. The kid never has to... There's no self-donation,
Right.
Self-sacrifice. The tree is like a botanical welcome mat. The kid can just keep abusing and coming back to. And I know it's supposed to be a sweet story about altruism, but First Things did a seminar, like a think tank. What's the word? They did a special, I remember, maybe 25 years ago, talking about the merits and demerits of that particular story. But you're right about boys have to surmount something. They have to pass a test. And the test has to do with standing on their own as a miniature man. There's no equivalent for girls, but boys have to walk through that. And now the social structures and the helps that used to be part of the warp and woof of the culture are vanished. So so now what? Is part of this, Tony, that in order to have boys and boyhood to defend, you have to have boys to exist? In other words, we're having fewer and fewer children, period. Your father, as you mentioned in the opening anecdote about the smell of shoe polish, reminding you of the, kind of a lazy Sunday after going to Mass. Your father was from a family of 10, correct?
Right.
Which was not a crazy large, not a huge, crazy number size family in the day, say pre-1960.
Yeah, 10 who survived. There were 11. His older sister died on the day that he was born. And those boys, like all boys, they had the run of not just the town. I mean, they almost had the run of the county. because on a day when they didn't have anything to do, they might hop a coal train or a freight train to Scranton, 10 miles away, just to hang out and do their little boyish mischief. Much of that stuff is gone now, right? Because you'll have Child Protective Services on your back if you let your boys ride bicycles a mile away.
One of the things that, from my own
But
childhood,
you're right about the testing.
The testing, yeah.
There is a reading in my copies of the Century magazine from 1880 about the Plains Indians' sun dance, and I believe I mentioned this in the book. Right, the boys are hooked by leather thongs and bone to a pole. The hook goes into the flesh by the chest, a little fatty flesh by the chest, and the idea for the boys is to somehow wriggle free of this, just using main force, just pulling against the leather straps. Right, excruciatingly painful, and sometimes boys would faint. It would take a couple of hours for them to tear that thing out. They couldn't use their hands, just pressure of the body against it, pulling back against it. And sometimes it would stretch the skin of the chest out an arm's length right from them. Gruesome, while the men about were beating on the drums and cheering them on. If you failed at it, I think they gave you a second try the next year. If you failed at it twice, that's it. You could never be a brave, right? But this is...
Yeah, I remember seeing this in a movie in the 70s. I want to say Richard, Irish actor. I remember seeing it was kind of shocking. Richard Harris, yeah. What movie am I thinking?
Yeah.
Like the skin, it looks like a special effect. The skin was so stretched, and you couldn't get out of the crisis. You had to bring it all the way to the finish line to free yourself, right? The movie will come to me. Go ahead.
This is being described by somebody who witnessed it, right? So this was going on in the 1880s still, and the person was privileged by the Plains Indians to be a part of this special ritual, because they generally wouldn't allow outsiders to look at it. And of course, it's barbaric, it's gruesome, but it's exactly the kind of thing that every culture has done for boys, right? You have there a public test and a public manifestation of your manhood. Once you pass this test, you are no longer a boy. Not to confuse profane things with sacred things, but it is rather like the bar mitzvah, okay? In that sense, it's like the bar mitzvah. And the boy, after having passed the test, says, "On this day I have become a man," right? It's not just I am a man and I am not a woman, right? That's a biological fact. It's I am a man, I am not a boy anymore, and that's not a biological fact. That's a cultural and public fact. That's a civil fact.
And look at the age of the bar mitzvahs. 13, right? Thereabouts?
Right. Well,
which is
right. Well,
12,
13,
yeah. So which is the approximate age of our Lord when he was found by his mom and St. Joseph in the temple.
Right.
So it's inconceivable that anyone listening or watching right now would think of your average 12 or 13-year-old boy as a man. But that's the cusp of it. That's ontologically when it kind of begins.
Yeah.
It's not 4, but it's also not 18.
No, or 28.
Right.
Or 30.
Because of video games, we've extended adolescence indefinitely.
Yeah. And it really is true that there didn't used to be adolescence, right? There was boyhood and manhood.
Right.
I think in this regard of John Quincy Adams, who at age 14 was effectively the United States ambassador to Russia. because he was in the company of the nominal ambassador to Russia, but the ambassador, I can't remember who it was, could not speak French, and French was the language of the Russian court. But John Quincy Adams, at age 14, spoke French fluently. So he was the one who transacted all the business, and wrote letters back to his father and to the state, the Department of State back home.
Yeah.
At age 14, right? That's inconceivable now. At age 14, 14-year-old kids can hardly read a book by Charles Dickens.
Yeah, that's true.
And there was John Quincy being the ambassador of the United States to Russia.
Youth ministry, I don't think existed in the early 60s, right? Like, what I'm still trying to figure out what World Youth Day means. I was there in 1993 at Denver. I was the one and only, I had no interest to go back, when John Paul II came to Denver. And there were 40-year-olds there. Like, what? Youth redefined as a guy who probably should be married and have a life at this point.
Yeah, well, now that's another topic, right? We've done our best to make it unlikely, if not impossible, that people before the age of 25 will be married. That's pathological. 90% of women before the age of 25 and men before the age of, let's say, 27, they should be married. All these people should be married. What is this nonsense about men putting off marriage until they're 40? It's antisocial. It's self-indulgent. It's unmanly. I mean, come on. But we've given boys and girls both no lessons in how to get along with members of the opposite sex. And the church needs to see to this, right? I mean, the church needs, forget about youth ministry, the church needs to get the young people married, right?
Yeah, marry young, pump out a bunch of kids.
For the family.
Yeah.
Right. If you have the family, you have that for which you have a job out in the workplace in the first place, right? It is insane to say we're going to have a society here in which families come second to work. Well, why are you working at all if not for a family? And it's insane, and it's against social justice to bring people up, boys and girls, with a sexual ethic that is not tailored to the good of the family in every respect, right? That's against social justice. Therefore, it's against social justice to neglect the making of men out of boys.
As you point out, even public schools used to be de facto segregated in the sense that they would have girls' entrances and boys' entrances. There was definitely a healthy separation of boys and girls in educational settings, even though they shared the same classroom. There was a kind of demarcation. This is the feminine sphere. This is the masculine sphere. And by the way, no one was interested in crossing spheres.
No, we've just collapsed into inanity and chaos. And the boys are hurt worst by it because their passage to manhood is much more difficult, is fraught with all kinds of difficulties that don't beset the girls. No woman says to a 25-year-old woman, "You're no woman." A man can say to another 25-year-old man, "You're not a man."
Interesting. There's no equivalent to be a man, is there? No one goes, think of it, be a woman. Sounds ridiculous.
That's right, because being a woman is largely a biological reality with cultural implications. Being a man is a cultural reality with biological foundation to it. But everybody knew these things. Everybody knew them. We pretend not to know them.
I've had a slow red pill about the word feminism. I've tried to concoct ways of domesticating it and putting a nice sounding adjective. And on Twitter the other day, I got in trouble because someone was someone posted a quote allegedly from Chesterton about feminism, and I noted that even St. John Paul the Great fell into using the phrase "true Christian feminism." I believe he did it in Mulieris Dignitatem, and I have a kind of a squabble with that, because it sounds like you're trying to domesticate something that's really not redeemable, like Christian rap. I'm sorry, not only is rap not music, you can't domesticate it or baptize it with Christian lyrics, in my humble opinion. But a lot of pushback. People do not want to hear that. What's your take on feminism? Is it something we should jettison, or can it be domesticated or repurposed?
It cannot be domesticated. At the root, feminism suggests that the interests of men and the interests of women are separable. That's at the base of every form of feminism that I can identify. One of my favorite authors is a new discovery of mine. She was an architectural writer in the 1890s, 1880s, 1900s. Marianne Griswold van Rensselaer, from the married into the Van Rensselaer family in New York. I mean, these are rich and well-educated people. Mm-hmm. And she wrote a treatise in 1894. Should we ask for the suffrage? And answers the question, no. Mm-hmm. This is about a 70, 80-page treatise. She says in that one of the root errors that the people who are claiming that we should ask for the suffrage, this was taken for granted, by the way, that if a majority of women asked for the suffrage, men would gladly give it to them. It was not being withheld from them by stubborn men. It was theirs to grasp when a majority of women obviously wanted it, right? Yeah. And so the question was not, should we make men give us the suffrage, but should we ask for it?
Yeah, just for people who've never heard the term suffrage. No, just want to interject. Suffrage refers to women getting the vote, right? Right. Not making women suffer.
And she said no.
Yeah.
Right. No, not making women suffer. She said no, and aside from the question of suffrage itself, she said that the error at the base of all this was the idea that the interests of man and the interests of woman are not the same. That is, that you could talk about the interests of women without reference to the good of men, okay? Or you could talk about the interests of men without reference to the good of women. And that, I think, is at the base of all feminism, that the sexes are not meant for one another, for the good of one another.
They're on separate tracks.
Right. And they may be parallel tracks, and they may get along with one another. See, I think that's an error that can't be baptized. If you say, well, all we want is that women will be treated justly, well, Mrs. Van Rensselaer wanted that. Everybody wanted that. Mm-hmm. Justice is one thing. Feminism is quite another, because feminism also suggests, in many of its forms, that man and woman are meaningless categories before the law. That is, what is just for a man is automatically going to be just for a woman, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. She showed that was in fact nonsense, and she listed a whole 5 pages worth of ways in which at that time the current New York state law favored women over men, and justly so, right? Anyway, I said, no, I don't think the word can be baptized, and the word causes all kinds of trouble upstream. That is, how you actually bring up the boys and the girls. You start bringing them up as if each sex has no reference to the other. And then you're surprised when they're 25, 30, 35 years old, nobody's getting married to anybody. But you've never raised them with the idea that the sexes are for one another. And girls are for boys and boys for girls, but in different ways.
Yeah.
You've never brought them up with that, and now you've got a whole lot of lonely people out there.
Hasn't birth control injected this idea that sex makes the act? Let me phrase it better. Birth control has allowed the idea that sexual relations are not for the other; they're for the self, in which the woman's body becomes an elaborate masturbation tool, and hence the cliche "why buy the cow when you're getting the milk for free" seems to have contributed to men delaying marriage, because why get the piece of paper when you can have the act that usually has distinguished marriage as a special relationship? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. Pope Paul predicted that.
Mm-hmm.
What he didn't predict is that women would start behaving in the same way.
Yeah, he didn't see that part coming.
No. Why buy the cow when you get the milk for free? Why buy the whole pig when actually what you want? I won't even complete the sentence. But I've heard women say, they only want the part; they don't want the whole pig.
Mm-hmm.
It's disgusting, and I challenge Catholics who believe that they are all about social justice to consider that we can't even talk about any kind of society to begin with unless there are strong and stable families, and there aren't going to be those strong and stable families unless we brought up kids to expect that, mm-hmm. and to expect that sexual activity is for the family and to be limited to what will promote and protect the family as an institution. If we were not doing that, we might as well be pouring all our social funds into a leaky pot, right? It just flows mm-hmm. out the bottom. Mm-hmm. Because there's no stable structure to hold it. There are no families. Anyway.
How do we get so gay so fast? I have to ask, because you can't watch a commercial, a movie, a TV show without a sympathetic, witty homosexual character. It's the apotheosis, or the level of success predicted in the 1989 book After the Ball. I'm not sure if you've heard that book, by Hunter Madsen and Marshall Kirk, two gay activists. One has since died of AIDS, and they had this 10-year program to rid America of its fear and hatred of gays. And everything they said everything planned they made came true. We're going to capture the judiciary. We're going to have professional athletes who are sympathetic. We're going to infiltrate television and movie writers, and we're going to redefine marriage. And they only missed it by 3 years when Massachusetts redefined marriage in 2003, excuse me. All of this seems to be wrapped up in this attack on boyhood, and not allowing boys to have salient father figures, if not biological fathers. This just seems like a lot of confluence there.
Oh yeah, sure. And while we're at it, one of the features of boyhood and civic manhood in all cultures is the brotherhood, right? Mm-hmm. You think of Tom Sawyer and his buddies in a cave along the Mississippi River, cutting their thumbs and becoming blood brothers, right? That close male friendship that is physically expressed is now off limits to all males except for athletes. Athletes can still be physically demonstrative because they're protected. Nobody's going to doubt their masculinity. They're athletes, right? Everybody else, nah. If the boys are too close, then they must be gay.
Yeah, it's suspect.
So we have right. So we have what's normal and natural being foreclosed by the public celebration of the unnatural, the pathological. All of this is antisocial and sick. Okay, all of this produces more alienation and more loneliness for the great majority of boys who simply will not know ever what it used to be like to have buddies that you did all kinds of things with, and that you could throw your arm around the shoulder of, right? Without any sense that you were doing anything creepy.
Right.
And the church, in cozying up to this, right, has done boys a great disservice. The other day, the last few days, there's a prominent Catholic priest who I won't name, and a prominent bishop whom I won't name, were asked a question about the Catholic teaching regarding homosexuality. Okay, what exactly is it? I think that we need to rephrase that, and I don't mean to be too coarse here, but the Catholic teaching regarding buggery is that it's wrong, and the desire for it is a bad desire. That's it. That's all. Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
I can put their names in the show notes just so people aren't too cryptid.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. Sure.
People who have desires for bad things, we've got to deal with them justly because we all have desires for bad things. Okay. But most people do not try to make their desires for bad things into norms for the rest of the world. This should not even be a topic of discussion. Buggery is bad, and the desire for it is bad. End of discussion. Now, how we treat people who, sometimes through no fault of their own, but through the negligence or cruelty, have been saddled with obsessive desires that are bad, that's a different question. But that should be leading the whole train of discussion regarding sex. That's insane. Okay. Our discussions regarding sex should be about the establishment of healthy manhood and healthy womanhood and healthy marriages. Okay. It's for the family and its protection and promotion. All the side issues can be dealt with as side issues, just as you deal with this or that kind of pathology in a body that's sick. As for the healthy body, it's a different matter, right?
Yeah.
And of course, the boys suffer worst because they're more vulnerable than girls are when it comes to this stuff. Physically more vulnerable, too.
When you were talking there, I was thinking about altar boys, another ecclesial setting for the brotherhood that since 1994, that has really been, slowly moving away. Great saints can make bad pastoral decisions. I don't think the inclusion of altar girls has been good for the pastoral life of the church, at least not in this country. I liken it because I have girls, and we've had the conversation about why they're never going to serve at the altar, and they understand it. If the priesthood is the majors, then altar boys are the minor league, the farm system. So why would you destroy your farm system? No wonder we have a crisis of numbers. When boys are like, it's like one more layer of feminine/effeminate ethos in church. The average Catholic parish in America is a very feminine environment.
Right. And if I know that people will say, rather cruelly too, there's a streak of cruelty in this. Will say, well, the boys will just have to learn because out in the world today, there are women who do this and women who do that and the other, right? And I say to them two things. First, we are not talking about grown men. We're only talking about children here. We're talking about boys. And second, you've mistaken the matter entirely if you think that the boy consciously says to himself, gee, this church is full of women doing things. I can't stand watching women do things. I think I'll go and do something else.
Right.
It doesn't rise to that level.
Yeah.
It doesn't rise to that level. It never really has his interest captured in the first place. Women who say that they want to be leaders in the church need to prove to me that they even have a conception of what it would be to be a leader. What are you talking about being a leader in the church when, in fact, what you do causes men and boys to lose interest and go play golf or do something else. You're not then leading. You're parading yourself. In any case, the more feminine the thing is, the less it will capture the boy's imagination. So the problem is on the other side. It's as if you're asking the boy to become enamored of a diet of books that are all Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. Now, you can say all you want. Oh, the boy should learn to read books that are about. But he's not going to enjoy them. He's not going to enjoy them. They're not going to inspire him. He's going to find them dull. He'll go do something else. We've allowed the same thing to happen with Mass in church. That's wrong.
Yeah. What are some books that you recommend for boys? Because I want to hit music too. Because a lot of we'll get to music in a second. But you mentioned Kim, Rudyard Kipling books, Treasure Island. What's the other Robert Louis Stevenson book?
Captain's Courageous.
Captain's Courageous. Yeah.
Jim now from Robert Louis Stevenson.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
There used to be the big publishing houses circa 1900, 1910 used to have whole lists of books aimed specifically for boys.
Boy, that's I'd love to get a hold of that. That's great.
Books, all the swashbuckler books by Raphael Sabatini. Okay, the adventure books and spy books by John Buchan. There was a lot. Frankly, anything written by Mark Twain.
Yeah, Mark Twain. I think books that get saddled with the albatross around their necks, classics. We should just get rid of the word classics for a generation, because you see the word classic, I'm already asleep. When I read The Adventures of Tom Sawyer as an adult, I almost had incontinence problems laughing so hard when they show up at their own funerals. I was not expecting the reaction of the show when the boys show up to their own funerals. It's like Monty Python's Flying Circus meets Kafka meets Saturday Night Live, but it's all so rich, and I have loved those books. Of course, nowadays with Huck Finn and so on, some of the language and the interracial relationships are now totally verboten. You can't even explore how it used to be. Even if it's anti-racism, even if it's anti-racism. Yeah, go ahead.
It's totally anti-racist, right? While you're at it there, if you want boys' books that will make you roll on the floor laughing and maybe wet your pants, Booth Tarkington's 3 Penrod books about a boy named Penrod Schofield.
Okay.
Penrod and Sam, and there's another one whose title I don't recall at the moment, but they are raucously funny.
Okay.
I think that we actually do know, especially men, right? We know what boys would like. We know what would cause them to thrive. And so if we neglect to provide that for them, we're as culpable as if we knew what was a good and healthy diet for a kid and deliberately withheld it, right? I mean, if you know that the kid is going to thrive if you give him this diet, and the diet is easy to procure, then you are to blame if you fail in that regard. Yeah. And our schools, it's gone beyond neglect. They actually don't want the boys to succeed except on their own very narrow terms. Boys who grow up to be strong and confident men, you think feminists want that? They don't want that. It's the last thing they want.
Yeah. Do you remember the incident, let's call it L'Affaire Summers? Larry Summers was the president of Harvard, dyed-in-the-wool liberal, decades committed to the cause.
Right.
He made a comment at a conference on math and engineering that he was just an aside. He wasn't even praising it. He was almost lamenting it. Maybe there's something about men that accounts for the wildly out of proportion participation of men in those hard sciences, physics and I'm summarizing now.
And
Well,
mathematics.
some feminists were triggered, and they got up and they left, and he was drummed out of his office. I mean, he was forced out.
Right.
So you can't even.
Right.
There's no. We talk about free speech with respect to political correctness and social issues. There's not even free speech with respect to science.
No.
And
No. About that, okay. Sometimes realities are so close to us, we don't even see them. Okay, they're too close. And I use for illustration the back of a baseball card. Okay, think about what's on the back of a baseball card. Most women and girls do not know what is on the back of a baseball card. Why? Because they don't collect baseball cards, right?
Yeah.
But all boys and men know what's on the back of a baseball card. Numbers everywhere. Okay?
That's right.
Statistics everywhere, right? Statistics with relation to each other, at bats, hits, batting average, so forth. Okay? Season statistics, career statistics, all kinds of things. Think of this, okay? The more, whatever activity it is, say activity A, okay? If activity A is pursued mostly by boys and men, okay? Activity A is much more likely to have a slew of numbers attached to it, okay?
Yeah.
And if activity B has a slew of numbers attached to it, it's more likely that men and boys will be pursuing it. Think about that, right?
Yeah. It doesn't work in reverse.
It doesn't work in reverse. No. No. Who plays chess?
Yeah,
Men
that's
play
right.
chess much more than women. Women play bridge, but who are the great bridge players in the world? They're, I think, 97 or 96 of the 100 greatest bridge players in the world, because they have rankings too, are men. Men gravitate towards numbers. The feminists want to counter this. They can't yell, they can't scream. They need to come up with female mathematicians that are in the league with any of the top 50 mathematicians in the history of the world that I can name. And they haven't, and frankly, they're not going to, for various reasons that have to do with masculinity and the construction of the masculine brain.
Right. Of course, I'm thinking of an anecdote. My listeners may have heard this before. It's something I heard from Kimberly Hahn about a boy and a girl about age 7, and they're in a tree, and they want to play pirate, and they're looking around the yard. They're up the tree. The tree is the mast of the ship, and they have an argument about who's going to be the captain. The boy says, "Boys are captains. I want to be the captain." And the girl says, they're brothers and sisters, "I want to be the captain. Girls can be captains too. I'm the captain." A fight ensues. So the mother is kind of looking out and see how they're going to resolve this. And finally, the girl says, "Okay, you be the captain. I'll be the captain's mother." So where does true power lie, right?
Mrs. Van Rensselaer had the same point to make. She said that it's a very strange attitude towards hierarchy of ends to suggest that that there is something merely subordinate in the female occupying the eggs and the nest, while the male brings food to her, wards off enemies, and sings for her delight. Right? And she saw that men, in their true leadership roles, do things ultimately for the good of their wives and their families. Right? So in one sense, the male then is at the top of a hierarchy, right? But in the other sense, it's the female at the top of the hierarchy, because it's the female for whom he's doing these things.
Yeah, that's right.
She says, imagine a society of men without women. Can we even imagine such a thing? Why would men even bother to build houses if it weren't for women?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What would men do?
Yeah, right. It's
They
like
do nothing.
you walk out the door of your house, and everywhere you look, you're going to see things built by men. And yet,
Right.
The people doing the looking came into this world through an incredible amount of pain and suffering, approaching death, as you point out in the book, namely women. So
Right.
it's just the examples of the complementarity are everywhere.
Right. And everybody knows
Mm-hmm.
them too. Everybody really does. So we have to expend a great deal of energy to pretend that we don't know them.
Yeah.
And this causes anger and resentment and so forth. It would be one thing if the people suffering from the delusion were only adults, but we're talking about kids suffering the delusion now, or the effects of the delusion, and that's evil.
It's interesting how
that's
even this conversation, I know someone is going to object to it, and I've read some of your critics, Tony, who say that you're hearkening back to an idyllic 1950s that never existed, and you can't play away the gay, and therefore you're offering some kind of a magic wand. What do you say to people who claim that you're going back to a nostalgia of what's the word? The good old days that never really were.
Let's take the second question first, that is, play away the gay. That's a disgusting piece of slander, because I never said that, all right? What I did say, and I'm going to qualify this in a moment, even at that, but what I did say was that if boys have fathers in the household and they have teams, institutions, whatever, where they get to be boys among other boys and to have their boyhood affirmed. Mm-hmm. Now, often in our time, this happens through athletics, but in the old days, it didn't mainly happen through athletics. It was work that they had to do together, or adventures in the woods, taking a canoe someplace, that sort of thing done together, not just athletics. Yeah. But if that's in place, then that boy is going to grow up normal, is not going to become gay, is not going to be stuck at age 50 still wrestling with what it means to be man. Okay, they didn't say that you after the trauma and the confusion that you can then cure it by joining a football team. Okay, but that these things were prophylactics against the syndrome developing in the first place. Right. However, there are cases though of men who have fallen into the homosexual life, but who are enabled to get out of it by experiencing, even as men, some of the things they didn't experience when they were boys. Classic case of this is the World War I poet Siegfried Sassoon. Siegfried Sassoon, who in World War I, for the first time in his life, experienced these close masculine bonds that he had been struggling to establish by means of homosexual activity. And after experiencing that and his conversion to the Catholic Church, he gave up that life. Okay.
So through non-sexualized close male contact.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So that was the second question. And the first question is also nonsense. Look, I'm not asking for a golden age. Golden ages don't exist. Okay. I'm asking for sanity. All right. Now I know for a fact that the sexual relations which were expected of people before the sexual revolution got turbocharged in the 1960s. I know that those expectations did, in fact, govern a large majority of people. Mm-hmm. And there were few children born out of wedlock, right? And this was even in a time when abortions were still quite rare. And that most people got married by the time they were 25, mm-hmm. and most people stayed married.
And there was a stigma to divorce.
So I'm not asking for...
Yeah.
Right. I'm not asking for something that's never been. I'm asking for a return to a status quo ante that we have actually experienced, not just in the United States either. And it's not just the 1950s. Every Christian culture that we've known has managed to figure this out, how to get the young people married and how to get them to stay married and how to make sure that children are born within wedlock. Blacks in 1900 in the United States had an out-of-wedlock birth rate that is only about 5 or 6%.
Yeah.
And they were grindingly poor and put upon by all kinds of injustice. So I mean, if they could have that then, under those conditions, what the heck stops us from having the same now, right? So those people are using that charge. Oh, this is simply nostalgia as an excuse not to get things done that have to get done, right? So it's indifference and irresponsibility.
So you agree, as I do, that we can't go back, to use the big fat cliche. We can never go back, but we can go forward. And going forward, what moves do we make to retain the principles and the values that represented and delivered stability and solidity and predictability and sanity?
When we say we can't go back, there's a trivial sense in which that's true, right? I mean, we now have computers and televisions and all these other sorts of things that we didn't have before. We've also lived through, say, 100 years of history that we didn't have before. But if what's meant is that we can't recover habits and virtues that used to characterize us but don't anymore, that's simply wrong, right? And I point people, if people will disagree with me on the moral issues, I say, listen, this is true even in the arts. Every literary revival in the history of English literature that I know of has come about because people at a certain time said, we're sick of doing what we've been doing the last 50 years. Let's do what they used to do before. Yeah. Okay? Now, it's never that it's just exactly what they used to do before, but the Romantic poets recovered Milton, who had fallen somewhat into abeyance, and they recovered Spenser, who had fallen. I mean, he was just plainly eclipsed. They recover them. They bring them back. It's the same thing for moral revolutions and moral revivals. You bring back some of the virtues of your forefathers. That's entirely possible. We can only go forward by modeling ourselves on what's been done before, though we know that we will now be doing those things in somewhat a different way and under different circumstances. And of course, when it comes to us Catholics, not only do we not have to invent wheels, we're given the rules, we're given the guidelines. They're in Scripture and they're in the teachings of the Church.
When I look at the movies that men resonate with, you can start the list with Gran Torino, which is not called Ford Pinto. Gladiator, whose main character is not named Minimus, right? It's Maximus. The Right Stuff, Chariots of Fire, The Passion of the Christ.
Right.
And on and on. They all seem to have one thing in common, and that is that it's this deep insight that men are, A, built for combat, B, are willing to die for the sake of some higher good.
Right. Right.
Movies that resonate with women, not so much. And that's okay. I'm not saying it's bad or inferior. It's just not the kind of thing that lights a man up inside. And you've got a bunch of examples. And speaking of that, one example of this, of someone who's not well known now, but was almost a household name. He was in decades worth of movies and didn't seem to pass this test, is actor Clifton Webb, that you point out, classic mama's boy. You remember that?
Yes. Clifton Webb is a kind of a sad story. I admire him very much as an actor.
Yep.
He did a lot of really good work. He's got range too. Clifton Webb's mother divorced Mr. Webb when the boy was about 3 years old. Mr. Webb was not interested in the theater. He was an engineer on a train. She took the boy from him. She never spoke about the father except with a sort of superior contempt, right? Mm-hmm. And she raised the boy to be in the theater. She put Clifton. She called him Webby, her little Webby. She raised him in the theater from a very young age, and he began to play at a young age the sort of persnickety, fussy roles that he would be known for later in his career. So he, at this very young boy, he plays Sid, the somewhat effeminate, persnickety older brother of Tom Sawyer, right, on stage. She dominated his entire life, this woman. It was pathological. Now, he was pathologically close to her, right? So close that the idea of a marriage to another woman was unthinkable. Yeah. He grew up homosexual. Now, he kept that under wraps generally. He was not. He didn't make a cause out of it or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's clear this is a homosexual who is made so by the aggressive and obnoxious dominance of his mother. He lived with her his whole life. When she died, around 1960, Clifton Webb went into deep depression, could no longer work, no longer went out of the house at all, and died a couple of years later, died of grief. Now, this is completely dysfunctional. This is pathological.
He's probably most famous for, he played Mr. Gilbreth in Cheaper by the Dozen. That's one of his better-known roles. Do you remember his last movie? Directed by Leo McCarey. 1962, Satan Never Sleeps. He plays a priest.
He's a priest?
In the movie, plays Father Bovard in Satan. It was his last movie. A lot of
roles. He's in 3 Points in a Fountain. He's in some war movies too.
Yeah, he's good. He didn't play one kind of character, as you mentioned.
No, and he, he would have been a normal man except for that family destruction there. Mm-hmm. But now we have boys everywhere growing up without men in their lives. And this is supposed to be cheered on, championed.
One more area that I think women are different from men and boys from girls. And you point out that girls, there's no such thing as a female class clown. If there is, it's weird. Boys are the class clown. Boys do imitations. Hey, watch this. Who am I? And then he'll do a little act. Because I don't know if it's an evolutionary biology thing. Pick me. There's it's an attention grabbing thing. We want to outdo the other males in the lottery here. I got into a lot of trouble a few years ago. I simply said women aren't funny. What I meant was, it's not the charism of femininity to professionally make people laugh. Of course, I mean, I have a daughter. I'm a sister, mom, wife. A lot of women have made me laugh deeply. I don't mean they're humorless. But when you look at the top female comedians, what we used to call comedians, Mobs Mabley, Phyllis Diller, Lily Tomlin, Carol Burnett, Joan Rivers, Roseanne Barr, Ellen DeGeneres, Margaret Cho, Amy Schumer, Roseanne O'Donnell, Wanda Sykes, Sarah Bernhardt, Paula Poundstone, Whoopi Goldberg, Kathy Griffin, they all have one thing in common. They're mannish. The act of standing up professionally, making people laugh, is inherently masculine. Where there's a sort of
something about that, yeah.
There's some mystery there.
Well, cardinals, the birds, cardinals, both sexes will sing, right? But mainly, it's the male singing. The male is singing in the springtime to attract the female, to keep the other male cardinals at bay, to notify them that there's food here, right? It's the boys who have to knock themselves out by doing silly, funny things Silly, funny things that, by the way, show that they are confident. Okay, they're confident enough to be goofballs.
Yeah.
They're not shy. They don't duck. Right. So they attract the girls. They make the girls laugh. And women, if they're honest, will say often that, one of the best things about him, what attracted me to him, was that he made me laugh all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's not a girl standing on her head in the middle of the classroom while the teacher is out to get the attention of the boys. It's some boy standing on his head in the middle of the classroom, right?
Yeah, and the teacher doesn't single out.
This is one of these cases where you.
Go ahead.
Well, depending on how you look at it, what we seem to be saying is that the male is superior in this regard, but he's superior in a way that makes him inferior because he's only doing these goofy things in order to attract the girl.
Out of his own need.
He's doing them for her, right?
Yeah.
So it's again a case of complementarity. What do you value here? Do you value the one who's doing the deed or the one for whom the deed is done?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, that's it's got to be evolutionary. If evolution is true, then this is a part of it. Males attract females by doing ridiculous things.
Mm-hmm. When I was reading your chapter, Songs to Sing, I was thinking, this sounds like St. Gregory the Great Academy. And voila, page 137, you mentioned it. This fine Catholic school in the Poconos, no cell phones, no video games, but you sing and you juggle and you run. And you think of the Palestrina, very much a focus on boys' voices. And boys love to sing. If given the chance, men love to sing. There's a book by Thomas Day, Why Catholics Can't Sing. I'm not sure if you've seen that. Insightful, funny book. Talk a little bit about the masculine hymns of old, many of them written by Protestants, that when you read them, they're like a mini catechism. And they're bold. They're about conflict and battle and combat, as compared to the the schlocky St. Louis Jesuits super soft mush.
So a man can't sing those St. Louis Jesuit songs unless he has an operation first. One such as would disqualify him for being a father. And
you don't mean an operation on his vocal cords, right?
No, not that. If you go through, let's say, even I'm not talking about the worst Catholic hymnals. I'm talking about, say, a pretty bad Catholic hymnal, but not as bad as Gather.
You can't even bring yourself to say the whole title. Gather.
Right. Well, so worship 3 and worship 4, right?
Yeah.
So you go through the hymnal and you say, okay, which of these hymns in here has something to do with the Christian as a warrior, right?
Yeah. Now,
the idea of Christian combat is all over the place in the letters of St. Paul, okay, and in the book of Revelation. It's all there, right? Mm-hmm. You will find in these Catholic hymnals only one such hymn, right? 1 out of 600. And it's for all the saints, unless they've eliminated the verses that are specifically military. If they have not eliminated those verses, you will find one for all the saints. The only reason why for all the saints is there is because you need it for All Saints' Day.
Right.
If it weren't for All Saints' Day, it wouldn't be there either. Okay. Now you go through the 1940 hymnal of the Episcopal Church. Now, Episcopalians were not known for being particularly martial, right? It's Episcopalians that George Bernard Shaw was thinking about when he said that clergymen were the third sex, right?
Yeah.
Yet,
Eddie,
it's in my 1940 hymnal of the Episcopal Church, I count about 50 hymns out of the 600 that they have in that particular hymnal. 50 that have to do with the Christian as a fighter. 50. That's okay. So that's about 8% of the total. But it's 50, not 1 and not 0.
Yeah.
What has happened to all of that? We don't sing those anymore. Most Catholics will go through their entire lives, okay, except for all the saints, and we assume that that's not been expurgated, okay, or Bowdlerized. They will go through their entire lives going to Mass every Sunday and never once sing a single hymn that has to do with the Christian as a fighter.
Correct.
Not one.
Yeah.
Not one. Never, soldiers of Christ, arise and put your armor on. Never, he who would valiant be. But this was a staple of Christian hymnody. Many of these hymns come from before the Reformation too. And what's become of them? Well, we can't sing them now because why? Because they would inspire men and boys, I guess. Yeah,
we might bring men and boys back into the church. And it's not like all the songs have simply been deleted. They've been replaced by soft, sentimental feminism. Even some of the weak, mushy dreck of the last 50 years has been, as you say, Bowdlerized, where inclusive language is even added in. You think of there's this, Suzanne Tulin has a song, I am the resurrection, right? I am the resurrection, I am. Well, now it's they who believe in me. The masculine pronoun as the generic pronoun is verboten.
Right. I'll say this to people out there who don't know these things because they don't have the authentic texts of hymns. They have only what they see in their hymnals. If you are using almost any Catholic hymnal, there may be one or two exceptions, but almost any Catholic hymnal, and you think that you're singing traditional hymns, when the hymn has been written, say, before 1960, I'm here to tell you that you're not, because the texts of those hymns have been altered. They've been neutered. All you need to do is to look at the bottom of the page and after the credit for the author, see the little abbreviation ALT period. That means that they've mangled the text.
They've had the operation.
They've had the operation. Well, it's either to get rid of thou and thee, which is stupid. Everybody knows what those words mean. Or it's to emasculate the text, right?
Yeah, I think you...
to get rid of references to God as he and so forth.
This feminization of sacred texts and great works of literature has certainly affected scripture reading and Bible study. I just do not like the New American Bible version that English-speaking Catholics around the world are subjected to because it's very... I'm not the philologist you are. What is it about it? I can't even articulate it. And it's not the loopy footnotes, which are crazy. It's the human beings instead of man. It's very horizontalized. Take it from there, because I've already ran out of the adjectives.
All right. The New American Bible is a horrible Bible. There are worse, and some of the really loopy evangelical Bibles these days are not even translations, but complete paraphrases, and they're crazy. But the New American Bible is a bad Bible. It's a bad translation. The New American Bible, every time when it's possible, will turn poetic turns of phrase in Scripture into something that sounds like an office memo. Okay, that's all the way throughout, right? So, for instance, classic case, parable of Jesus talking about the man who had a vineyard and left his vineyard in the care of tenant farmers, and then sent a servant to bring back the fruits of the vineyard. It's fruits in in the Greek. Okay, it's literally fruits, and the New American Bible turns it into the abstract word produce.
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 Like the department where you can get 80 different things.
Right. Fruits is a hugely important scriptural word. Jesus doesn't say, by their produce you shall know them.
Yeah.
By their fruits, right? Mm-hmm. And Abel and Cain were supposed to bring the first fruits
right.
of the season to sacrifice to the Lord. But that's typical of the New American Bible, all over the place. I saw it in our lectionary yesterday, reading from the Revelation of St. John, where the Greek says, you will reveal to the people, you will write down of what was, what is, and what is to come. And the lectionary takes that, which is extremely powerful and poetic, and makes it what has happened, what is happening, and what will happen, ruining the connection between the events and the person of Christ himself, because I am the one who was, who am, and who is to come.
Harkening back to Moses and the burning bush and so on. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely terrible translation. And then they decide that because certain feminists are going to break out into hives whenever a masculine pronoun is used, they decide to mangle the English language and mangle the scripture in order to suppress all of that. And frankly, in order to suppress references that specifically have to do with males. So when St. Paul says, quit yourselves like men, okay?
Yeah.
And that's what it says literally in the Greek, okay? It's referring literally in that case to adult males. Acquit yourselves like men, okay? Jerome's Latin, viriliter agite, okay? Our lectionary will say, be courageous.
That's right. When I was a child, I used to think like a child. Now that I am an adult, instead of a man.
Now that I'm an adult, I think like an adult. Right.
Yeah.
It renders it sexless, also renders it, in most cases, renders it highly impersonal. It robs the text of most of its power. I go on endlessly about that. Meantime, any boy out there who might be inspired by the possibility of donning armor in order to fight for the Lord, his mind is wandering. The priest up there is cracking silly and effeminate jokes, and the boy is thinking about football.
Or worse, his video game.
Or worse.
Yeah,
right,
think of video games are like they're substitute adventures.
Right.
You're a first-person shooter. You're identifying with millions of pixelated beams of light that are living out a fantasy that doesn't exist.
Right.
And it is, you have to use the word addiction. I interviewed a guy called Dr. Nick Carderas, who wrote a very instructive book called Glow Kids. And I said, are you really talking addiction? And he said, Patrick, some of my clients buy Depends adult incontinence diapers because they don't want to go to the bathroom because it would interrupt the flow of, we're talking pulling all-nighters. They can't stop. And so this now with VR and 4D rendering, we're talking a very potent, vivid, false reality. So yeah, if the language of the liturgy in the Bible is not reaching the boy, he's going to reach for something else. You notice how there's a trend now when we recite the creed to say for us and for our salvation, because they don't want to say the dreaded M word, right?
It's to be resisted. We treat the M word as if it were a fouler word than what you might find scrawled on the wall of a lavatory at a rest stop.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You can use any kind of filthy word you like, but use the word man in its general sense, so there you're talking some real obscenity.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wish we had even more time to drill even deeper. There's lots we couldn't get to, but I will have to, threaten you in some vague way to come back on the show and talk more about movies. Defending Boyhood, How Building Forts, Reading Stories, Playing Ball, and Praying to God Can Change the World, published by TAN. You can get a link at patrickcoffin.media, and I'll put some of the other ways in which you can be reached, like Thomas More and Touchstone, right? That you write on music there at Touchstone? And Magnificat. Okay, terrific. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for being a gift. Thanks for joining us. I always learn a ton. Thanks again.
Well, thanks, Patrick. It's a great pleasure.
All right. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Remember, go to covenanteyes.com and put my name, Patrick, as a coupon code. You get 30 days for free of the world's best porn blocker and accountability software. Be a saint. What else is there? Hey, this is Patrick Coffin. If you like what you see and hear and you want to see and hear more, consider joining Coffin Nation as a full member. Just click right here and find out more about what that means. Nipsey, my fedora. That's Coffin Nation, the world's largest online community of culture builders. Click right here. See you on the inside.